Hi, I'm Marcia Lehman and I'm a Knox County Master Gardener. Today I'm at the home of another Master Gardener who has a nice collection of Santolina. You may have heard it called Santolina, but when I checked the botanical pronunciations, supposedly it's Santolina. In particular, this is Santolina chamaecyparissus. And that chamaecyparissus tells us that this is a compact variety. That's important because there are some other varieties of Santolina, and while they get pruned similarly, because they get different sizes, you're pruning one a little harder than the other. So this is Santolina chamaecyparissus, and it's sometimes called lavender cotton or cotton lavender. Haven't a clue where the cotton part comes from, but the lavender part comes from the fact that when you look at the plant, it does bear some resemblance to lavender in its structure, but the leaves are quite different than lavender, and trust me, the flowers, when you look at the handout, the flowers are quite different. They're a little yellow ball. Now, this plant likes consistent moisture. It doesn't need a lot of moisture, but it likes consistent moisture. It also needs to be pruned twice a year. So in late winter, early spring, which is where we are now, we're going to come in and clean out anything that's dead, anything that's crossing, rubbing. We're going to make sure the 4Ds are addressed. And then later in the summer, after it flowers, you remove those flower stems, not just the flower itself, and then you give the plant a general shaping to get it back to a nice round shape and to keep it relatively small. If that doesn't happen, then if we scan over to here to this plant, you can see that this one has kind of opened up in the center. And that's what happens when it doesn't get adequately pruned. Now, these shrubs were put in the fall of 2021, but they were nice sized container shrubs when they went in. So they're a little older than just the year and a half that they've been in the ground here. So this will need a little harder pruning. But for today, we're going to start on this one, which has some nice new growth. If I pull this back, we've got some nice new growth a couple inches down from the top. So we're going to cut back to that. And then if we can zoom in even further, we have some lovely new green growth down here at the base of the plant. So this plant's going to look a whole lot shorter when we're done pruning it. But it still has, aside from my messing it up, it still has a relatively nice round compact shape. So let's get started. So the first thing we're going to do here is clean out around the plant. I have my handy dandy little rake with me today. And we'll just get under here and get these leaves out of the way. And again, being a compact plant, I don't need loppers today. Everything we're going to do can be done with hand pruners, and they have been sanitized. So I'm coming in, and I had mentioned we had some new growth down here, and this may seem drastic, but on this, here's our new growth, and all this stuff above it is relatively brown. So we're just going to take that out. And next to it, similarly, we're just going to, so this plant's going to get a whole lot shorter by the time we're finished here. But I just take a major stem, find that new growth, and then snip around it. And yeah, this is just a great specimen. We will come back in the summertime after it flowers and show you how to deadhead it and reshape it. But right now, we're basically taking out dead stuff. So we're pruning these tips back. And this may actually be a little more drastic than usual. And if you're in the East Tennessee area, you will remember that right before Christmas, we had a really significant Arctic blast. And we think that some of the damage here is due to the fact that the temperature dropped about 50 degrees in one day, went from 70 to 20, continued to go down and then stayed below freezing for about 4 days. Wasn't so much the cold temperatures, but it was that abrupt change. Plants don't go dormant like turning off a light switch. They need a little time to react to what's going on weather-wise, and they just didn't have it. So we probably have a little bit more dead stuff as a result of that Arctic blast. And here I've got, that's just coming off all the way back at the ground because that's all brown. The outermost edge is what seems to have the most brown on it. So we'll just, here we go. Yep. I don't know if you can still see, but here on this stem, we've got this at the top, but we've got a nice new growth there. So we'll snip back to there. Santolina is one of those plants that really responds well to pruning. So while this may feel drastic, the plant will love it. Pruning triggers growth, so it's going to put out a whole lot of new growth and then just be covered in lovely yellow flowers as you see in the handout. Again, I really recommend you look at the handout for the additional pointers, but it's a lovely plant. Let me just keep going here. Let me pause for a moment so I can reposition and we'll get the front part of the plant. Around to the front of the plant, I've got the back side done and it looks quite different, but I'm just going to continue coming around, snipping off the tops back to where I see this flush of new growth. So, and then when we've got this really brown stuff, well, that's obvious. Let's come around. When we finish here, it will look quite different to the ones beside it. Oh, the other comment I would make is you can probably see a little bit to your right some additional Santolina, and notice the color. They're in full sun at the moment, and they have kind of a light gray color. The color is not quite as bluish as the lavender, but pretty close. I mean, from a distance you could confuse the plants. We happen to, because it's such a bright sunny day, to facilitate the shooting of the video, we've actually set up an umbrella so we can get better contrast in the video. But so it, you know, the one I'm pruning probably looks quite different than the one to the right, but it will look like it'll be that same color when we take down the shade umbrella. So I've got most of this cleaned up here. It's like anything else. Every time you think you're done, you find one more little dead sprig. And a couple little dead sprigs won't hurt, but we'll try and get all of these. This has lovely new growth on it. That one's dead. But now you can see the new growth coming up at the base, and we're going to keep that. Get a couple more leaves out of there. But that type of pruning at this time of year will stimulate lots of new growth, and after it flowers, it'll need a second pruning to remove the flower heads and to reshape it. So at this point, we're just pruning to encourage it to put up new growth and put out lots of lovely flowers. So that one is done. Now I've moved over to the next plant because I wanted to show you what happens when it doesn't get pruned enough. And that is that the center wants to split open. And you really want to avoid that happening. So you'll learn with time that you probably need to prune a little bit harder than you're initially comfortable doing. But the whole point of pruning that significantly is to keep it from splitting open. When it gets a big long stem on it and it gets loaded with flowers, then it's going to split open in the center. So we're going to work on this one, and it has not a whole lot of new growth, but I'm going to start in the middle here where it has split, because that's all brown. and it goes crunch when I grab it, so I know it's dead. But way down here at the bottom, sure enough, there's some new growth coming. But this one's going to be even more drastic than the other because it has already split open. But we're going to prune it pretty hard and encourage it to put out some new growth and recover from that flash freeze from Christmas time. But the good news is, as I say, I see new green growth down here at the base. So this one's going to look even smaller than the prior one that we did. But the good news is it's got green growth down here. And we're going to open it up so it can have sunlight and start to grow. There's a nice new cluster. No green on that. Ah, see, now there's a little green, so I want to be careful not to take that side. We'll keep that. But we'll clean up the very tip of it. Get rid of this in the middle. There's a little, they're really little sprigs here, but that is new growth. And having gotten all this other stuff out of its way, it's going to come back and take a while. One of the other things with Santolina, especially when they start to split open like that, is the recommendation is every 2 to 3 years come back and prune them really hard. So I would say that is an example of the every 2 to 3 year prune it really hard. But I would really limit that to those that have tended to split open. Okay, so let's go look at one more plant. We've moved over to a third plant which did not have as much winter kill as the first two we showed you. It's in a different spot in the garden and may just be a slightly different microclimate. So it's got this lovely rounded shape, but it's beginning to show signs of wanting to split. And so you could say, man, this plant looks really good just the way it is. It's got this nice round shape. But keep in mind, it's going to grow this spring, get taller, it's going to be loaded with flowers, and when it gets wet in the rain, all that foliage gets really heavy, and that's what causes it to split open. So it can be tempting to just say, oh, this one looks great, let's just keep it the way it is. But in fact, it needs to be pruned back. And so we're going to do the same thing. We're going to look in here, pull this back in the center, and for instance, if we can get a shot here, we see new growth coming here at the base. So we're going to prune this back. And I know that seems drastic, but we really don't want additional height on this. This is, remember, this Santolina chamaecyparissus is a compact variety. This is one of the places where it differs from some of the other varieties. And if you don't prune it back, then that new growth is going to be really heavy and it will get weighted down and split open in the summer. So consider this preventive medicine. Now, so we're just going to do that same thing. Again, it can be a real challenge to actually do the pruning that is required here, but it will make for a better specimen this summer. So you don't need to watch me prune the rest of this. I'll work on this and we'll show you what it looks like when I'm done. But the whole point is to keep it relatively short. It is compact, such that the length does not get so long as when it gets wet in the summer, it then splits open. I've finished pruning this Santolina, and as we zoom down in, you can see it looks much shorter, but I took all that extra length off back to where we saw signs of new green growth. So it'll put out and get back as tall as what that plant was before. And if we can zoom in, what's really fascinating is way down here in the base, we also have some new green growth. The one other thing we did is we talked about saving a few clippings to propagate, but instead decided that we would take two particular low-hanging branches and try to propagate by layering. So we've made contact with soil and buried that stem so that we don't cut it off, and we'll try and propagate another plant or two. But this will put out a new flush of green growth this spring. It'll bloom this summer. We'll come back and do the summer pruning, but this is Santolina chamaecyparissus. Again, it looks like lavender. It's not lavender. Has a lot of habits like lavender, but it is actually in the aster family. So it gets pruned differently than lavender. So that is Santolina, the compact variety. We hope you learned something today, and we thank you for joining us.